Creativity. It's so flexible a concept and admired a quality that all of us likely say we have it and that it thrives in our workplaces. Like its root word, it's a skill and habit of creation. In today's climate of innovation in the knowledge economy, it's highly coveted. But what is it? Do you actually have it, and can you get more of it? Welcome to the Twid Show, a weekly interview series from Technically on building better workplaces. I'm CEO and your host, Chris Wink. My guest today is Natalie Nixon, a creativity strategist and president of Figure 8 Thinking. Her new book is called The Creativity Leap. In this episode, we're going to talk and give it some advice on how to encourage creativity in the workplace. Natalie, thank you for being here.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we go a long way back. So creativity leap, let's start with the basics. What is a creativity leap in your usage? And we'll use that to dig in.
Sure. So I wrote the book, The Creativity Leap, for a couple of reasons. One very selfish business reason was to kind of productize my intellectual capital. I'm a global keynote speaker, and I would be talking about
very
building
clinical phrase, to productize my intellectual capital. I like that, Natalie.
I'm a former academic, lifetime nerd, so that's where that comes from. But I would give these talks, and some people will come up afterward and say, hey, that was great. Where can I read more about this? And I realized I could point them to my Inc. column, but I didn't really have like a centralized place that was holding all these ideas floating around my head. So this book is a product of about 4 years of practice and research and thinking about how creativity is really this essential competency now in what we're calling this fourth industrial revolution, as well as for the future of work. And the other reason I wrote the book, The Creativity Leap, is because I, in my consultancy practice, often help clients build, air quotes, cultures of innovation. And I would have this creeping sensation that we were kind of talking over and around each other and kind of throwing out this word innovation without necessarily having a lingua franca and really understanding that we were on the same page. So I realized in my view, we actually needed to just take a step back and start with creativity, because creativity is the engine for innovation. So I ended up calling this book, The Creativity Leap, because as I say, in the introductory paragraph, I'm really exploring what does it take to make a leap. It's impossible to leap backward. You have to have a vision in your eye on something. There has to be some sort of barrier that you want to scale in order to take this leap, and leaps propel us forward. So this idea of the necessity of vision, identifying the impediment or the barrier, and realizing that it will only bring us forward, it's impossible to leap backward, is where I had this mashup of a creativity leap.
So I want to come back to the relationship between creativity and innovation, which are words that rightly get teased for being over and misused. So we'll get there. But first, creativity is a quality that everyone's going to say they have, and I'm sure everyone would claim their organization has it too. How are you assessing whether an organization has it, or I'm sure it's more of a spectrum, what are signs of more or less creativity in an organization or even a person? What do you look for when you're first sniff testing?
A great question. And I've actually found that what we've done is not everyone embraces the creativity in them. We've kind of ghettoized creativity in the arts. And so how often have you heard, Chris, people say things like, I'm not a creativity type because I can't fill in the blank, paint, right? Play an instrument, dance, etc. So while artists are really excellent at manifesting creativity, I define creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. To be an incredible scientist, engineer, attorney, teacher, you've got to be uber creative, this ability to toggle between wonder and rigor. So the way creativity shows up on an individual level is kind of scaled differently, similarly to organizations, but I would go back to part of my creativity framework, the 3 I's. People have a propensity for inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. And what I mean by those 3 is as follows. people who have insatiable curiosity, who are really skilled at asking different types of questions, in part because they do what I call, they're able to circle the table. And I'm getting that from my background in fashion. So if you know anything about the way tailors work, before a tailor cuts into fabric, the fabric is spread out on the table, and they're circling the table, looking at the fabric from different angles, seeing the sheen of the fabric as light hits it differently, looking at the pattern, the weave, or if it's a knit construction, the print, and understanding the best place to start cutting, right? So you have to circle the table, and curiosity is a way in to circle the table and understand an issue from multiple perspectives. And Warren Berger is the author of a wonderful book called A More Beautiful Question. And I love how he reminds us that asking questions is a way of thinking. Yeah, it might point out that you're ignorant about something, but there's no shame in that game. But unfortunately, in our educational systems, in a lot of our organizational cultures, we've kind of nullified curiosity and asking questions because it's become kind of punitive if you don't know the answer. But so people who are super curious, who've gotten skilled at asking different sets of questions, primarily because they surround themselves with people who think differently from them, that helps to spark curiosity. That's one sign. In an organization, it's leadership that leads with inquiry. So going back to Warren Berger, in his book, he sought out what he considered to be innovative companies, and he realized that they lead with questions. They tend to ask why questions. Why don't we hire people under age 40? Or why do we only hire people over age 50? Why do we hire people from those sorts of schools, right? Why? Then they ask, what if? What if we started to hire people who have a high school diploma and rich work experience, right? And then they converge into how questions. The improvisational piece is not that you're really great at, hopping up on stage and doing a dynamic jazz solo riff, or you are comfortable doing like a comedic improv. Improvisation is about being adaptive. It's about the build, saying yes and instead of yeah, but we tried that 10 years ago, or flat out no's, right? So improvisation is about being adaptive, self-organizing, and emergent, and being okay with process instead of the one solution. So in an individual, these are people who are really active listeners. They're really okay and comfortable with ambiguity. I call them ambiguous confident. In organizations, two examples of organizations that are actually really great improvisational organizations, one I've talked about a lot before is the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I actually did a lot of my doctoral research with them. And then Trader Joe's is another example. I had a conversation recently with Karen Hurt. She and her husband have just released a book called Courageous Cultures. And she was sharing this example of how Trader Joe's, in the middle of, they had to close the stores suddenly, and there's this backlog of customers, and they introduced play and competition in order to get people moving through the queues more quickly. So an organization that is not micromanaging, that doesn't have a permission slip culture, is a great example of an improvisational organization. And finally, intuition. We never talk about intuition in business school, in medical school, in law school, yet every single successful entrepreneur, startup leader I have ever listened to in terms of their origin story, they reference moments such as something told me not to do the deal, or something told me to work with her over him, even though her pedigree wasn't as sniffy. And I started thinking to myself, well, what's that something? I think it's intuition. We don't touch it in MBA programs. And I believe that intuition is a type of pattern recognition. It's that internal nudge, that internal antenna. And what I learned in interviewing over 50 people for the Creativity Leap is that people who follow their intuition as a way to make decisions, combined with maybe some hard data, but that they do listen to their intuition, are consistently more successful in seeing through a vision from just a concept to its end. So those are some of the variables and the factors and characteristics.
I want to move toward what we do with it, but to pause for a moment on how I might self-assess, because I have a hunch that when the word creativity gets tossed, particularly anyone who might watch these videos or read these pieces on Technically, might start from an assumption of like, we're already creative, I don't need this. And I want to pull out a couple of things that you're saying that I think might serve as a kind of framework for understanding. One, older or more established organizations can sometimes get the narrative of being less creative, in part for some sensible reasons, like some of what I heard you say. If you've just been doing it for a while, you can get pretty good and pretty comfortable, and you can start saying, we don't do that because we do it this way, because it's working. You know, that's why we've been around for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. Naturally, you could see we're just doing this. And so that can begin to feel too rigid. So that's one reason. But I suspect it's not only more established organizations, because you can really quickly build in rigidity. And so, yes, it may often and sensibly show up in some larger and more established organizations, but it doesn't have to only. And some of those triggers that I heard you saying that someone watching this might want to be wary of, or say, oh, maybe we're falling into this trap, is scared of those big kind of questions. If you don't say,
Yes.
do we have to do this initiative again? Or like, why are we doing that? Maybe just play that out a little bit more. Like, hey, I'm a 3-year-old company. I'm totally creative. I run a startup. We build software. Don't need this Natalie Nixon nonsense. We're good. Is there any push on where creativity can lapse in places like that?
So here's the thing, and I really came away with this when I listened to an interview with the actor Laura Linney, who stars in Ozarks, hashtag great Netflix show.
You need a hashtag. You can just say great Netflix show.
Great Netflix show, yes. And she was being interviewed in this terrific podcast that LinkedIn produces. It's called Hello Monday. And Jesse Hempel was interviewing Laura Linney. Laura Linney was talking about this moment that happens in every single rehearsal process she's ever been a part of, where actors, the whole team hits a wall. They go through this honeymoon stage, and then things begin to fall apart. And what she says in this interview is that actors, artists especially, are really good at sitting with the discomfort of ambiguity. The other thing that actors have is they have coaches in their lives. It's called a director, right? So there is this principle, which, not to ghettoize creativity in the arts, but something that we can learn from the arts, is that there is this principle of always learning, of always stretching oneself. I for example, my background in the arts was in dance. So I studied dance from age 4 onward. I still dance, I still practice dance. And I'll never forget a moment when one of my dance teachers, we were going through a very fundamental movement in dance. There's 2 movements. It's called the plie, which is where you kind of bend into the ground, and then the releve, where you're stretching up on your metatarsal, on your toes. And in the releve, this teacher was explaining, you never arrive. And for some reason, in my little 14-year-old head, I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like, I'll never arrive. I'm always going to be stretching. And that metaphorically is the mindset that we must take into our work. Whether we are kind of confident that we're the cool kids on the block, or we are this 100-year-old company, when, we look into the rearview mirror. When Apple looks into the rearview mirror, there's no one back there. Maybe a few people, but that's actually when you need this urgency to adopt this mindset of never arriving, of always stretching, of always learning. And I think a creativity mindset is very much what Carol Dweck from Stanford calls a growth mindset. To have a creativity mindset, to always be exercising creativity as a competency, means that you're always curious, you're always about improvising and trying new things, so that you don't fall into the trap of one of 2 things: either having a superiority complex, which is super dangerous, or an inferiority complex, where you never take those leaps that we were talking about earlier, because you're just scared that you'll make a wrong move, right? The other thing I wanted to say is I thought it was really interesting. You said, Chris, you used this word rigidity, and I just want to call out, rigidity is not the same as rigor, right? So rigor is about process and commitment to deep practice and skill development. But in the midst of rigor is where wonder can often be found. And the corollary to that is that rigor can't be sustained without wonder. So make sure that you're not confusing rigidity for rigor. They're two very different things.
And wonder, I imagine, is a degree of exploration, but rigor allows for boundaries.
Correct.
Only because you're still in an organizational context. Like creativity,
Absolutely.
boundless is wonderful if you want to explore, poetry or dance that are meant to have no bounds. You're meant to push beyond bounds. I imagine in an organization, almost like by use of the word organize inside of that word, there's a degree of we still need to get the donuts made. And that's where rigor plays for you. Is that right?
Touche, hombre. I would say no, actually.
Forget the donuts.
So let's go back to the first part of your comment. In dance, creativity is not doing whatever you feel like, right? That's why it was so important for me to have a definition that really called out this toggling between wonder and rigor. The boundaries that come from knowing the fundamentals, you're absolutely right, are there so you can push up against them. That's what happens in jazz music. That's what happens in European classical music. That's what happens. I mean, Yo-Yo Ma has a very different approach to playing the Bach suites than anyone else who came before him. And Vanessa Chan has a very different approach as well. Dancers also need to know the fundamentals so they can push against them. Organizations are fundamentally, we forget, organizations are organisms. Organizations consist of people. I remember when I was doing the tedious work, and I decided naively to earn a PhD while working full-time. And there's a moment in the PhD research process where you have to do something called a lit review, literature review. And so I had to read all this stuff, all this academic-y stuff about business and organizations and theory on that in order to prove my contribution. What was more interesting to me as I was like metacognitively thinking about what I was reading and learning, there's all the business literature up until like the late 70s. Business scholarship tried so hard to appear super scientific. There would be a hypothesis put out. You would then begin to disprove the hypothesis step by step, and that was your scholarly article. Around the late 70s, early 80s, also around the time when behavioral economics takes off, it's like mind blown. All of a sudden, scholars who are studying business realize, hang on, markets are made up of people. Therefore, markets are inconsistent. They're not predictive. They are they're sometimes they're not logical. They're a bit irrational, right? Similarly, organizations, we have to remember that fundamentally organizations are made up of people. And I've been jokingly saying that a lot of us have to show up to work every day in drag. We don't really get to show up as our true human selves. And my argument is that if we actually allowed people to, pull up the veil, draw back the curtain, look underneath the hood to understand really what makes me tick, it actually would contribute to productivity. And as productivity improves, efficiencies go up. As efficiencies go up, costs go down. So this is another example of what I like to call the business ROI of creativity. There's not some soft, fuzzy dotted line between creativity and business ROI. There's actually a solid, bold line. And so an organization that can have its boundaries in terms of its values, in terms of our systems, in terms of our IP, in terms of our really cool app or our je ne sais quoi way of helping with, this sector and solving this problem in the marketplace, also needs to leave room for the humanness. And the good news, I think, is that in this fourth industrial revolution, where tech is ubiquitous, in the future of work, where tech is just going to integrate throughout our lives in ways that we can't even imagine right now, there's actually going to be more room for the human, because anything that's a task we know is going to be automated. It's going to be taken over with AI. It actually, the opportunity, the silver lining in my view, is that we actually will have more room. There's going to be a void now created for more of the humanness to show up in our work environments and the way we approach work. And I hope that that shows up more in terms of creativity, hiring for creativity, cultivating creativity, and then sustaining it.
Mm. I'm going to lose you in a couple minutes, so let me put two smaller cues to you. One, as alluded to earlier, a bugaboo of mine is the overflexing of the word innovation in a similar way that I think you're getting at with creativity. These are words that do have definitions and common usage that do work. Innovation's an old word, not a new one. And for us, technically, we use a lot. That innovation is new approaches and tools for old problems. That's how we simply define it. It means something. And creativity is, again, definitionally, it's an act of creation. It's the skill of getting good at creating stuff. I guess I wonder how you have those words relate. I'm very loath to see innovation get so overused that we're going to lose it. And that, words change, but I wonder how you're using those words, creativity and innovation, together without sounding like another guru who is, we're innovating.
Right. Well, first of all, I love that you started your question with "I wonder," because anything that follows that phrase "I wonder" is always awesomeness.
Good.
So creativity is the engine for innovation. I define, as I've already said, creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. Innovation, as I define it, is invention converted into value. When we just have an invention, until we've added value, financial value, social value, cultural value, until we've and been able to scale it, it's not an innovation yet. So for example, I was in the post office a week or so ago, waiting to pay for some stamps, shipping out some books to some friends and colleagues. And there's a little canister of Q-tips. And I said to the postal worker, I asked, why are there Q-tips here? And he said, oh, that's because if people don't want to tap the pad, they can just take a Q-tip and they can tap the pad, for to slide your credit card through. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I took a picture of it because I thought this is such a great example of that's an invention, right? It's not an innovation yet until we figure out how to actually apply consistent value to it and how to scale it. So creativity is that bridge from invention to innovation. Creativity is that conversion factor. It will help us to convert that invention into a real innovation that has scalable value. So that's how I make sense of it.
I like it. Last question before I send us out. Give us something to walk away with that we can use. Anything tangible, concrete tactics that anyone listening or reading could say, I want to walk in my workplace today and get a little more creative or foster a little bit more ability to leap. What's something that I could tactically do?
Oh, one thing is to read this book. Bam! Right? So, but beyond that, so become a clumsy student of something. When we are in
clumsy student, is that what you said?
A clumsy, humble student of something. When we, not work related, right? What do you like to tinker at? What do you want to get better at? So I'll give you two examples in my life. So I mentioned I've studied dance. I love dance. So right now I'm a student of the tango and the foxtrot. I'm really bad at it. I'm always asking new and different questions. I'm constantly having to improvise and figure out and hack my way through something I think I saw my instructor just do. I'm intuiting the way I should be moving with my partner, right? I am re-triggering neural synapses in my brain that will help me, that are helping me in staring at a gnarly problem related to a client, right, that I'm trying to help them through. Another example of a clumsy student that I am now, my stepdaughter gifted me with pickling jars for Mother's Day. And so I now, because she knows I love pickles, so she's like, maybe Natalie would like to explore this. And I have been. I let it sit there for like 6 weeks and now I've started getting into it. So becoming a clumsy student of something. Another thing for organizations to do right now, please incentivize your teams in lateral thinking. Since we can't go to conferences right now, one of the things I read about in my book is require a member of your team to go to a conference that's in a sector that's totally unrelated to you. So if you work in automotive, go to a fashion conference. If you work in education, go to a sustainability ecology conference, right? Right now, start attending webinars that are in totally different sectors. And again, this will help to bring and raise new questions and new insights into the way you've been doing your work.
Perfect. All right, we got to go. That was my dear friend, Natalie Nixon, whose new book, The Creativity Leap, is out now. We'll have links below on the video and in Technically's recap article. This has been the TWID Show weekly conversations on building better workplaces. I'm Chris Wink. I'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.